This is what the Lord says to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of this people. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it.
Do you feel it in the air? Everything is strange in a world wasted by fear.
Morgellons disease is a disease where people... Is that Morgellons? Is that what it's called?
But you're saying something you didn't even think about before.
Yeah, I thought it was bullshit before because I had read that it was bullshit. And talking to a doctor who had Morgellons, who explained to me that there's some sort of neurotoxic effect of Lyme disease, and that everyone who has Morgellons also has Lyme disease.
Damn.
And
An unidentified hairless creature washed ashore near the town of Montauk, New York. Dubbed the Montauk Monster by the press, first a discussion centered on whether the creature was an elaborate hoax. However, talk soon shifted to whether this creature could have been from the mysterious Plum Island. At the time, it was the home to the Animal Disease Center just 2 miles from the American mainland. The center's administration had vigorously denied any involvement, yet the facility on the island had been accused of a string of unethical practices. From biological weapons testing to warped genetic practices. But if the monster wasn't a product of Plum Island experiments, what is it that they actually did? Plum Island was owned by a succession of families from 1659 until 1890, when it was given over for military use. The U.S. Army Chemical Corps began work on a series of laboratories in 1952 before ownership was transferred to the Department of Agriculture under advisement from one Eric Traub. Traub was a leading scientific light in Nazi Germany during World War II and had been suspected of working on the Axis biological warfare program. Soon after it opened in 1954, Plum Island began studies into foot and mouth disease. This was the same disease Traub was suspected to have worked to weaponize during the war. The official purpose of the facility was to research effective preventative measures against agricultural diseases. Given the devastating effect it would have on the economy, this isn't all that strange. That was until 2001, when one of the worst outbreaks of foot and mouth in the UK cost the British economy over $5.5 billion. However, local people had been increasingly concerned with Plum Island's other, less publicized activities. For decades, authorities denied reports that they had participated in biological warfare programs. This is despite allegations from Cuba that their agriculture had been infected by the US with the deadly Newcastle virus. The same Newcastle virus which Eric Traub, advisor to Plum Island, had worked on during the war. Documents uncovered by Newsweek magazine in 1993 appeared to confirm the suspicions of a history of bioweapons research. Officially, these programs were struck from the books in 1969 by President Richard Nixon. However, locals such as Randy Sykes were not convinced. The local area appeared to suffer from regular disease outbreaks. In 1978, Lyme disease appeared a mere 13 miles away from the facility and was quickly blamed by the sufferers. In 1999, the West Nile virus, another of Dr. Traub's areas of specialty, was found for the first time in the United States. Interestingly, the first record human cases in the US are cited on being found in Queens, New York, approximately 90 miles from Plum Island. The USDA has dismissed both cases as merely coincidence, and issued no explanation for West Nile virus' sudden appearance. Meanwhile, theorists such as Jesse Ventura alleged that at best the powers that be are negligent and that the outbreaks have been covered up accidents. At worst, the facility had intentionally released pathogens into the surrounding areas, perhaps to monitor the effectiveness and virality of their programs. If the latter was the case, how bad was the security on Plum Island? And how much at risk was the general public? In 2002, 76 maintenance staff members went on strike after talks broke down over pay rises and jobs going to the private sector. As a consequence, emergency temps were drafted, yet problems were still occurring. Water pressure dropped across the island. disabling contamination in necropsy rooms. And the Union of the Striking Workers accused authorities of failing to properly screen replacements. In 2003, a whistleblower named James A. McCoy accused the center of permitting security breaches and inappropriate asbestos cleaning. Perhaps most damning of all was author Kenneth King had claimed he had evidence of workers using duct tape to seal testing laboratories. However, for those seeking answers about Plum Island's darker experiments, time has all but run out. The Department of Homeland Security, the current owners, closed the facility in 2005 and moved its inner workings to a new facility located all too close to home for me. A new facility was constructed and is still in use in Manhattan, Kansas today. As far as Plum Island is concerned, its secrets were probably buried deep within governmental archives. So where does that leave the Montauk Monster in all this? Officially, the monster had been identified as a decomposing raccoon, so apparently case closed. But possibly not. In 2010, a dead human body was found on Plum Island itself. The body was described as being tall and well-built, with elongated fingers and injuries consistent with brain surgery. This gruesome discovery led to even more allegations that Plum Island wasn't just experimenting on animals, but had moved on to humans as well. And as of yet, there's been no official explanation, as if there would be. As far as the new facility being operated in Manhattan, Kansas, this for one wasn't something the people who lived in the state were really told. At least it doesn't seem to be common knowledge. Considering I'm a resident myself, I actually wasn't even aware that something like that existed only a few hours from where I live, which is crazy in and of itself. But this poses another question to me. How does having a bioweapons/disease research lab so close to the food production breadbasket make any sense? All it would take would be for one slip up and something horrible could overtake the food supply and thus spread to the rest of the country. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't happened. Yet. So what do you think? Was Plum Island conducting horrific animal and/or human experiments? Were diseases and viruses being tested on the population? And what do you think of the new lab being located right in the breadbasket of Middle America? Make sure to let me know down in the comments below.
Straight out of the pages of science fiction, militarized ticks ready to kill. Not like this, riding missiles into the air, but with diseases like Lyme disease. The theory is scientists during the Cold War ran experiments on ticks and other insects to create biological weapons. And somehow those bugs got out, either released on purpose or by accident, which is why some believe we're seeing a big uptick in Lyme disease. In the last 20 years, the CDC says Lyme disease cases have gone up by nearly 300%. Of weaponized ticks isn't as crazy as you'd think, especially not to the author of this book, Bitten: The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons, written by Stanford University science writer Chris Newby, who also directed a documentary on Lyme disease. Another believer, U.S. Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey, who led the charge earlier this month to get the Department of Defense to look back into its archives and find any proof of these experiments. Congress actually approved the idea, so now we wait to see what they find out.
This is Borrelia burgdorferi, one of many bacteria that ticks can pass on to humans and the one responsible for Lyme disease. It causes an array of symptoms, which can be anything from fatigue, arthritis, facial palsy, and occasionally a bullseye rash, erythema migrans if you want to get technical. We've only known about the pathogen since the early 1980s, but it's been around for much longer than that, potentially for thousands of years longer. Traces of its effects were even found in Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old hunter found mummified in the Italian Alps. But while we're not exactly sure where and when Borrelia originated, we do know a lot about how the disease works and how it's spread.
I should take my glasses off. My name is Raphael Stricker. I'm a medical doctor. I practice in San Francisco. I have over 4,000 Lyme disease patients in my practice, and I've written more than 200 papers about Lyme disease. Ticks have been called sewers of infection. Anything that they feed on, they can pick up and transmit to you.
These sewers of infection need blood to survive. Sometimes that's bird blood. Sometimes it's reptile blood, but a lot of the time it's mammal blood, like mice and deer. If a tick feeds on one of those animals and they are infected with the bacteria, the tick will carry it and then spread it to other animals, who then spread it to other ticks, and so on. Occasionally, those ticks spread the disease to us, and they do that by passing the pathogen through the tick's saliva, which some people call a pretty fascinating substance.
Tick saliva is really a pretty fascinating substance. It has several components. One is it has an anesthetic that numbs the bite site so that the person doesn't know that he or she is being infected. It also has an anticoagulant that keeps the blood from clotting so that the tick can feed continuously at that site. And then it also has this immunosuppressive substance that suppresses the immune response at the bite site so that the host can't fight off the infection. It's been shown that a tick bite can inject about 70,000 Lyme bacteria. So you're getting a pretty hefty dose of this spirochete, it's called a spirochete, with a tick bite.
So, what does Borrelia burgdorferi actually do to your body? Technically, nothing. The bacteria itself doesn't harm your cells, but your body knows the pathogen shouldn't be there, so it launches an all-out assault. Your immune system will first try to fight off disease by targeting proteins on the bacteria's cell walls, but the spirochete can just change which proteins it expresses and evade detection. So much for that idea. Then, as the pathogen moves through your bloodstream to other parts of your body, your immune system continues to fight it by producing cytokines, which work to regulate your immune system and produce inflammation. This inflammation then occurs in the areas the bacteria travels to, which, depending on the strain of Borrelia, can occur in the joints, muscles, heart, and even the brain. But due to the bacteria's ability to evade detection, this inflammation does nothing to destroy it, and everything to make you feel sick.
So that's what really causes the symptoms. It's not the bacteria per se, it's the body's response to the bacteria that causes a lot of these symptoms.
Basically, Borrelia burgdorferi isn't doing much of anything, other than trying to survive in its host. It was created around 16 years ago, it's no longer being produced due to low usage and potential side effects. But there is interest in developing a new in two different ways. One idea is to target the proteins expressed by the Borrelia itself, which fights Lyme disease, while the other idea would involve fighting the compounds in tick saliva, which would fight Lyme as well as a number of tick-borne diseases. Because ticks are, after all,
sewers of infection.
Morgellons disease is a dermopathy characterized by multicolored filaments that lie under, are embedded in, or project from skin. Although Morgellons disease was initially considered to be a delusional disorder, recent studies have demonstrated that the dermopathy is associated with tick-borne infection, that the filaments are keratin and collagen in composition, and that they result from proliferation of keratinocytes and fibroblasts in the epidermis. Culture, histopathological, and molecular evidence of spirochetal infection associated with Morgellons disease has been presented in several published studies using a variety of techniques. Spirochetes genetically identified as Borrelia burgdorferi sensu stricto predominate as the infective agent present in most of the Morgellons skin specimens studied so far. Other species of Borrelia, including Borrelia guerini, Borrelia miyamotoi, and Borrelia hermsii, have also been detected in skin specimens taken from Morgellons patients. The optimal treatment for Morgellons disease remains to be determined.
What was I saying?
Morgellons disease.
That is a real disease. That this Morgellons disease is what it is Lyme disease. There's a bunch of pathogens that come with Lyme disease. You know, it's not just the Lyme disease. It's not like a pure one, like a 1 or a 0. You have it or you don't. It's a dirty tick.
Mm-hmm. More than 20,000 people around the world claim the same set of symptoms. Sores that cover the body, chronic fatigue, and strangest of all, mysterious multicolored fibers that seem to sprout from under their skin. Pharmacology professor Randy Wymore has studied these fibers in his attempt to understand the condition.
When I first started this research, I thought that the fibers were really held the key to this condition. And if identify what the fibers are, we can figure out where they come from.
The medical establishment argues that the fibers are nothing more than textiles from clothing, embedded in the open sores. To investigate this, Professor Wymore has taken fibers from 20 Morgellons disease sufferers. By comparing them with a police forensic database of known materials, he hopes to find out what they could be.
The first database has around 1,200 fibers, essentially every known fiber that's used commercially.
The results are a complete surprise.
Shockingly, the fibers didn't match anything in the database.
The mystery fibers don't appear to be textiles of any kind. They don't come from clothes, carpets, or home furnishings.
In a literature review, clinical studies supporting the hypothesis that Morgellons disease is exclusively delusional in origin have considerable methodological flaws and often neglect the fact that mental disorders can result from underlying somatic illness. In contrast, rigorous experimental investigations show that this skin affliction results from a physiological response to the presence of an infectious agent. Recent studies from that point of view show an association between Morgellons disease and spirochetal infection in humans, cattle, and dogs. These investigations have determined that the cutaneous filaments are not implanted textile fibers, but are composed of the cellular proteins keratin and collagen, and result from overproduction of these filaments in response to spirochetal infection. Further studies of the genetics, pathogenesis, and treatment of Morgellons disease are warranted.
This is literally the surface of skin. This is an anatomical, extremely microscopic shot. Now, this would be the blood vessels, which are the capillaries, the very tiny little end pieces where the blood transfers from, the artery back to the vein to go back to get fixed back up. Now, what do you see when you see Morgellons disease? You see fibers coming out of here. They scratch the skin because they're just so itchy. Well, something's going on down in here. These are those same colored fibers. Let me show you what they look like. And then, if you want to get really deep into the research, I'm going to have a very deep research about it. Now, this is Morgellons. These are the fibers that are coming out from the skin when they scratch them. It's kind of a nasty disease to have. And these are actually exuding out from the exact place I just showed you a moment ago, which is underneath the skin. And they're scratching it, and the fibers are growing right out of there. Now, that's not normal. Something is going on there. And now, it might be parasites. They say it's linked to Lyme disease. Again, we're going to get deep into this, because it also affects every other disease, I believe, in your body. Morgellons is just one of the manifestations of this particular issue, which is bacterial imbalance. Let's go with that. Okay, this just came out recently. 8 types of rashes that can be a sign of COVID-19. 21% of patients, that's the only symptom they had whatsoever, but they had COVID-19. And that was, one study found a rash was the only symptom of COVID for 21% of patients. That's 1 in 5. It was just about the skin. Now, here's what happens to the skin, though. This can be really bad. Now, here's where I start to think maybe there's some connection here. Sometimes papular and vesicular rashes aren't so easily identifiable. In some cases, it is only tiny bumps all over the skin, and the signs may be more subtle. In general, the rashes are usually very itchy, okay? Very itchy. So something's going wrong. You can't get, it's trying to expel that stuff. It appears to be a similar situation. Needs to be looked at. Is there bacteria in there? Is there collagens and keratins that are globbed up together? They really haven't looked at this very closely. But these rashes can last long after the contagious stage is over and may also appear many weeks after the onset of the infection. Now, look at this. This is the kind of conditions they're talking about. These little, like that, you have little tiny blood vessels there. That looks like somebody's elbow or foot, I'm not sure. Purpura is a term used to describe the purplish discoloration of the skin caused by bleeding into the skin. Well, why is it bleeding into its own area there? Something's breaking through membranes or something's causing it to hemorrhage inside all over the place. Why? Then you have these kind of rashes. That looks like it's almost like an infection, almost sepsis or something in the bloodstream. But my point is, it appears something is clogging up or breaking down at that particular point. Is it some special bacteria that lives there that's supposed to protect you there, and it's dead? Or, or is it something that's just filtering through there, and a filtration at these particular places it clogs up any specific spots? They say is 21% is the only symptom. One study found a rash was the only symptom of COVID for 21% of patients. That's staggering. Nobody's talking about that. Highly unlikely you know about this. Very few people do. This is from a survey that was done of the photographs and rashes and so forth. 17% of the respondents tested positive for coronavirus reported a rash as the first symptom of the disease. They got a rash. For 1 in 5 people, that's 20% of all the people that had COVID reported a rash and were confirmed as being infected with coronavirus. The rash was their only symptom. Great.
I still remember the moment. It's something I will never forget. The hair on my hands just stood up. It's a microscopic universe within each cell.
This is an unprecedented view of the cellular world, where we can actually see immune cells scooping up sugars in the ear of a zebrafish in real time.
Focusing only on the crawling immune cells, we've noticed 2 classes of them. One was not hungry at all, but it was very active in terms of trying to figure out, what the environment is. There was another one that was kind of sloshing around with a lot of food in its belly. We can actually conceptualize and visualize and analyze the contents of each of these cellular compartments in this crawling immune cell as it's kind of, scooping up its environment. I mean, that is a level of details no one's seen before.
We're living in
a new age. Now, they did look into it, apparently. They did 3.2 million participants, and they said there was a 3.65% case, or 3.65 cases for every 100,000. So that's like add another couple zeros behind that. Now, the same CDC study showed that this Morgellons disease is most often seen in white middle-aged women. Why? That's a good question. Another study showed that people are at a higher risk for this disease if they have had Lyme disease or have it. They were exposed to a tick. All right, this is the key. The tick. The blood testing were bitten by a tick. Or they have hypothyroidism. Well, let's just look into hypothyroidism first. All right, this is really important to understand about this particular gland, the hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism occurs when your body doesn't produce enough thyroid hormones. Well, hormones are enzymes. Hormones is not a well understood word. We'll go into that in a minute too. The thyroid, small butterfly-shaped gland in the front of your neck. So what does that do? It senses everything that goes down your throat. It's in the front of your neck. It releases hormones to help your body regulate and use energy because it knows what just passed by. It knows what to release. The thyroid is responsible for providing energy to nearly every organ in your body. So if it's not providing the correct enzymes based on what went by, certain organs are not going to get their share. It controls functions such as how your heart beats, how your digestive system works. That's the key right there. If you're not digesting correctly, it means your thyroid didn't say, hey, I got some sugar coming down, I got some acids, I got some salts. You're not going to digest it correctly. Without the right amount of thyroid enzymes, forget hormones, enzymes, your body's natural function begins to slow down. And what are thyroid enzymes? Well, let's look into hormones versus enzymes. All right, here's exactly what I said. Enzymes are biological catalysts. They break things down so elegantly, it's unbelievable. They catalyze biological reactions. They break down food, they create different products to fight off bacteria and so forth. Now, hormones are not catalysts. Hormones simply initiate biochemical reactions. They're the alerters. They're the ones that go down and say, hey, we got some sugar coming, we got some this coming, we got some of that coming. And then they are the initiators of biochemical reactions, and then the enzymes create the catalyst. Well, where do the enzymes come from? They come from bacteria. If you don't have the bacteria living in the little fluid-filled bags and the membranes and the interstitium of your body, you are not going to be healthy. You need the bacteria, and you need the right bacteria in the right places, and then you need your thyroid to say, hey, we got this stuff coming down, and you're going to have to deal with it. All right, so what did we just talk about? Lyme disease, ticks, hyperthyroidism. Hyperthyroidism alerts bacteria to make certain catalysts to break down certain things in your body to make products to keep you alive, basically. If your thyroid is not saying, hey, make this certain product, then it's not going to be made. If the bacteria is not there in the digestive system or in the wherever it is, you're riddled with bacteria, and that bacteria is good for you. And this thyroid says, hey, we need to produce some whatever the chemistry is, and if it's not done, you're going to be sick. So if the thyroid doesn't tell you something, because it doesn't have the right action going on there, well, you're not going to know what to do. If it sends a signal down, I think most of the time the thyroid is doing its job, but the bacteria is not there to respond. So that's the key. If your bacteria is dead, you're not going to be able to respond. And how can I make sort of that jump? Well, because we're talking about Lyme and ticks. And I had a very good, well, he's a good friend now, that alerted me to this. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. All right, here's almost the same as the Morgellons fibers. Purple, pink, red, or blue lesions on the toes resemble perniochimbalinus or frostbite-like rash were reported in individuals with COVID-19, mostly among children and young adults. Any big research going on Morgellons, unless you can point to some. This is about as far as you can get into Morgellons. Upon further research investigation, researchers conclude the fibers contain human skin cells, which is the interstitium cells. They found the fibers originated from hair follicles, not fabric, and they're not from hair follicles. They're from the interstitium fibers. In a more recent 2018 study involving 1,000 people, Lyme disease, 6% of the individuals had Morgellons and tested positive for being just what they say here. Unusual filaments, Morgellons disease, were shown to originate in deep skin cell layers in response to infection with this Lyme spirochete. Now,
it has a bunch of fucking horrible diseases inside of its nasty little bus. You get a bullseye looking red mark around the area, and then you start experiencing terrible symptoms like flu-like symptoms. And you got to catch it quick.
Stop being able to read.
You're supposed to catch it quick.
This guy in my community wanted to brush his teeth, and he's like, he couldn't go back and forth. He was like, what the fuck?
My friend's kid got Bell's palsy where his face went numb.
Don't get me started.
Oh,
dude,
my God.
I had a
teacher that had Bell's palsy in high school, and they kept him out, and then he came back.
And he was okay, bro.
No, but he came back while he still had the face paralysis.
I think it's a virus.
Persistent symptoms in Lyme disease and in the long haulers are remarkably similar. There seems to be this trio of symptoms that are linked and travel together in both of these illnesses and similarly in chronic fatigue syndrome and even fibromyalgia. And these three symptoms are very characteristic. They include fatigue, and by fatigue I mean severe fatigue, not just the mild fatigue of everyday living, but kind of disabling fatigue. The second symptom are in the cognitive symptom realm, and those are memory problems, difficulty focusing and multitasking. And then the third type of symptoms are pain type symptoms involving either the musculoskeletal system or sometimes the nerves, but it are the pain type of symptoms. It was striking when I first saw the display of the symptoms in the COVID long haulers. They were displayed on a graph where each line in the graph was one of the symptoms, and they formed kind of a pattern. And when you take that pattern in the COVID long haulers and put it next to the pattern of the Lyme persistent symptom group, they're almost identical. It almost makes like a butterfly of symmetry of the distribution of the symptoms. Again, at the top are those core symptoms: fatigue, cognitive symptoms, pain, and they almost parallel each other exactly in the two illnesses. The COVID long haulers on one side, the persistent Lyme group on the other side. It's remarkable. One of the lessons that the long-haul Lyme patients, those with these prolonged persistent symptoms, one of the lessons that the Lyme disease patients taught us is that these patients are often misunderstood and not heard. Their illness really has a huge impact on their life. We learned that in Lyme disease. We're hoping the same thing doesn't happen in the COVID long haulers. In fact, Allison Redman and I from our research group published a letter to the editor of Lancet, pointing out the similarities in how the long hauler patients were not being believed, and how we shouldn't subject that on those patients, because we learned from Lyme disease that harms the patients even more. They're already sick, but then if they're not believed, that's insult to injury.
The federal government is interested in having Plum Island, which is right out there, become the site for the most dangerous level of biological research. The Department of Homeland Security, which manages the island, is looking at it as the location for a new national bio and agro defense facility. This despite the problems for more than 50 years with the Plum Island Animal Disease Center already located on Plum Island. The new facility would operate at biosafety level 4, the highest danger level for biological research. The way the federal government defines it, it involves research into diseases that affect both people and animals for which there are no vaccines or cures. The Department of Homeland Security is bullish about Plum Island as the site for the facility because there's not a lot of livestock hereabouts. On the other hand, Plum Island is smack in the middle of the population center of America, between Boston and New York, just a mile off the northeastern end of Long Island. And there are plenty of people here.
Executive summary that says normal operations pose no threat to the surrounding community is absurd on its face. There's no way that, let's assume for a moment, that the operations are normal. But that assumes that all of the material, the construction, the pipes, the filters are perfect. Otherwise, the normal operation does pose a hazard. And if we're going to assume that the construction and the material is perfect, well, we're living in a fairyland. I mean, all we have to do is look at what's happened in New York City just now, where they discovered that the buildings department, which is supposed to inspect concrete, couldn't do that. And dozens of high-rise buildings will have to be re-inspected because the concrete wasn't poured properly and because there was fraud. And if you think the federal government is exempt from fraud, you might just want to look at some of the GAO studies. Just look at Iraq. I myself, when I was in Congress, was involved in uncovering major fraud in actually Department of Agriculture finance programs. Let me say, too, that not only is that statement absurd on its face and based on assumptions that nobody could agree with, but the idea that the risk is low to none, again a quote, except for fire from accident, is another absurdity. Accident. Of course, accident can happen in the construction. We don't want to talk about fraud. But it can be accidental operation, all kinds of things. People might slip through the security. There might be negligent operation of the facility. All we have to do is look at what happened a few months ago when an Air Force plane carried nuclear weapons. This was a whoops. Well, what about a whoops here? A whoops here means that human beings are going to be affected. No discussion of intentional risks caused by intentional acts. Think of what happened now with anthrax. In light of that, can anyone here say that the risk is minimal, negligible, or whatever? You have people who are crazy. I was a former prosecutor. You have people who are crazy. You have people who are disgruntled employees. You have people who are angry at their family, their lovers, their whatever. This is too grave a danger to human life, and this EIS doesn't deal with these issues. Thank you.
The CRISPR-Cas9 system is a tool for cutting DNA at a specifically targeted location. The technique has already revolutionized gene editing, but scientists are always looking for new possibilities. So what else can CRISPR do? Since being discovered in a bacterial immune system, CRISPR-Cas9 has been adapted into a powerful tool for genomic research. There are two components to the system: a DNA cutting protein called Cas9 and an RNA molecule known as the guide RNA. Bound together, they form a complex that can identify and cut specific sections of DNA. But making double-strand breaks isn't all CRISPR can do.
The key raw material for biorobotics is living tissue. It's a discipline that integrates biology with mechanical design. There's an entire world of innate behavior and rich biochemistry that could be utilized in cellular machines. And on top of all of that, the form of these biorobots all resemble existing organisms. Enter the Xenobot. Xenobots were born out of a goal to make an entirely biological robot with no artificial components. A robot built from the ground up, using only animal cells, taking shape not based on any existing life form, but in a totally novel configuration. And it all starts with a frog embryo. After a frog egg is fertilized, it forms into a ball of stem cells. This clump of cells looks completely uniform, but in reality, all of these cells have a predetermined purpose, a fate of what they're meant to become. The cells on top generally become epidermis or part of the central nervous system. The cells in the middle form the muscles, and the cells on the bottom form the endoderm, which leads to the development of organs. These different sections can be disassembled into their different components, and then reassembled in a new arrangement. This de- and reconstruction is done entirely by hand using forceps. The desired sections of the embryo are removed, then basically mushed back together. They are then bathed in a media that causes them to stick together, and they re-adhere into a sphere. Then the spheres can be sculpted into new shapes using a cauterizer. The formation of the bots is done by human hands, but the design isn't human at all. It comes instead from a complex artificial intelligence.
We're here today to announce the first synthetic cell, a cell made by starting with the digital code in the computer, building the chromosome from 4 bottles of chemicals, assembling that chromosome in yeast, transplanting it into a recipient bacterial cell and transforming that cell into a new bacterial species. So this is the first self-replicating species that we've had on the planet whose parent is a computer. It also is the first species to have its own website encoded in its genetic code. But we'll talk more about the watermarks in a minute. This is a project that had its inception 15 years ago. When our team, we called the Institute Tiger, were involved in sequencing the first 2 genomes in history. We did Haemophilus influenzae, and then the smallest genome of a self-replicating organism, that of Mycoplasma genitalium. And as soon as we had these 2 sequences, we thought, if this is supposed to be the smallest genome of a self-replicating species, could there be even a smaller genome? Could we understand the basis of cellular life at the genetic level? We set out 2 goals. One, to understand the impact of our technology on the environment and how to understand the environment better. And 2, to start down this process of making synthetic life to understand basic life.
You are going to have a constant battle with Morgellons because this is a bio-nano affliction. It's a polymerized biofilm that you've been afflicted with. It's coming from the sky and it's coming from the ground. You're walking down the street. I'm in the fall of northeastern, midwestern United States and Canada. Look at the leaves. They got these big black spots and these rustic colors. That is your barium, your aluminum, and your titanium and your radioactive materials coming from the sky. I had a theory about a year ago because I've been working with another fellow out west named Brian. I told him that I think that the chemtrails are different in different parts of the world. It was only a hypothesis up until 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, the Europeans are now saying that they're finding plutonium in chemtrails. We already had uranium, we already had thorium. That's why some of you are feeling sick and faint sometimes when you're going about your day, because you're having a fallout. I've been fighting this for myself for a long time. So I'm going to show you something that will make a huge difference in healing the lesions and helping you draw out the particulates in the skin. What you're going to use is aloe vera gel. Okay, I'm going to pour in about 250 milliliters, okay? So now we're going to add to it citric acid. Probably 1.5, probably about a teaspoon of citric acid, because this is a small spoon. Okay, you're going to add salicylic acid, aspirin. Okay, now, do not buy the 81 milligram shit that they're telling you to take every day. It's shit, end of story. You've got waxes in it, you've got metal components to it. Polymers do not break down in the body. They do not pass through the body. If you break down the polymer in the body, it will change and morph into something completely different. So, you cannot aggressively break these things down in your system. So if you're going to use an aspirin, use it pure. Place to get a pure aspirin is UnitedNuclear.com. Go get it. Go check them out there if you're in the United States. Anyway, using about that much aspirin, probably a quarter of a teaspoon, in it goes. Why are we using aspirin? Because aspirin strips off toxins off the skin and actually heals the skin and reduces inflammation of the skin. Okay, we're adding vitamin C. What does citric acid do? Citric acid protects from the collagen breaking down. Why are we putting it in aloe vera? Because aloe vera will penetrate up to 3 layers of skin. So vitamin C. We're going to put about 20 grams, give or take, or maybe 15. 15 grams. Okay. So we got straight vitamin C, and the last thing we're going to put in is iodine, but we're not going to put it in right away. We're going to do something first. We're going to use our high-powered, high-tech device here. It costs us about $2. Okay. Now, you don't have to use a blender. I'm going to for display purposes, but I want this stuff in there. Okay, here we go. Just want to run it long enough for it to dissolve, about 2 minutes if that. Now, we dissolved the components, they're in there. Now, the last ingredient. Let's see if I can put it in there. We're going to add iodine to it. Now, why didn't I put it in there? Because iodine breaks down metal, and I don't want to risk breaking down my blade. So I'm going to put in, half a dropper, 20 drops or so. Okay, maybe a little bit more. Now, how am I going to mix that? Okay, I don't have a wooden spoon. Go like this kind of thing, you know. So you do this about 20 times. Okay? So you're glass on glass, no metal. You got your iodine in there. Oh, this is a beauty. Now, you can also add copper in here. If you got colloidal copper or chlorophyll, you can do that as well and apply it. I mean, there's more than one way of doing this, but this is a beauty. Right, there you go. Now, how do you work it? Oh, now, if you want, you can scent it with petitgrain. So I have to put it back in there. Or any essential oil you like, lemon, lemongrass, whatever. Whatever you have. You can add, if you add tea tree oil, it could be a little bit on the harsh side. So add the lighter oil. Petitgrain will work. Essential oil, lemon will work. Putting about 5 drops in there. This will give it a scent, and it will give it the healing properties of petitgrain as well. So hey, you can do it this way. Oh, see how this will work. Okay, see my hand's wet? Alright, I'll show you how safe it is. Rub it on, just like that. Okay, rub it on all over. What'll happen is, when you start rubbing it on, and really rubbing it in, what you may find is the polymers will start coming out. You may find tiny little black specks, blue specks, red specks. I even had a yellow speck. Definitely, you've been penetrated by the stuff in the sky. If you've got a wound, sometimes a piece will come out of you, and when the stuff comes out, it will infect you as it went in. Okay, it's one of the last, it releases a biofilm or releases some other nano kind of tech that, again, starts that process all over again. So if you do this before a bath, okay, and I will give you a Morgellon formula for a Morgellon bath. What you're going to use is betadine soap. You're going to use TSP. You can use the Miracle soap or Epsom salt, and you can use baking soda. Okay, quarter cup of baking soda, a quarter cup, I didn't write that down, I should have, a quarter cup of Epsom salt, or a ounce of Miracle soap, a cap full of betadine or povidone soap. Put it in the water as hot as you can take it, stir it up in the tub, and then sit in it for 20 minutes. Take a light brush and start brushing. You will find that you'll have all kinds of fibers, they'll look like hairs, coming out of you. You'll have black polymers coming out of you, particulates. You almost will look like a bug kind of thing, but they're not. You'll have red things come out, blue things. You'll see a shitload of stuff come out of you. And this is because, and you can't see it on the skin because they're on a nano scale. They are beyond micro, you'd have to have a special microscope. I've got a 45x ocular, and even with that I have a hard time seeing this stuff. So I've got people that are coming in there, and if you starting to see lesions form and geometrical patterns forming on your body, you have Morgellons. Okay, you have it. Everybody's got Morgellons. It's at different stages. If you're eating genetically modified food, which most of us are, and we're under these skies, which are dumping 27 chemicals on our bodies, those polymers bind with that biofilm that's inside of us and start to replicate and reproduce. That's how this is working. This is not going to cure your Morgellons. There isn't anything out there that's going to cure you of Morgellons, but what it's going to do is it's going to lower the load in your body so that your body has a better chance of controlling the overload that's in your system. Once you have it and you start seeing the elements come out, that means you've got an overload. And your body's immune system is working because it's trying to push it out. That's a normal reaction. Okay? So when you're dealing with it, there are pools of polymers inside your skin that these things are utilizing to create a base or stimulate activity and growth in your system. So it was the engineers that cured the bubonic plague. It wasn't the doctors, it wasn't the herbalists, it wasn't anybody else, it was the engineers. When they separated the water from the wastewater that they were consuming, the spread of the disease stopped. The rats were dealt with because they were spreading it from the same water, and people were drinking the same water that they were defecating in as opposed to what they were drinking in. Until this stops, until this water modification experiment stops on our planet, this geoengineering, till we stop killing the earth with the genetics changing the bacterial and the biodiversity of these plants, we will all be afflicted in some form or another. If a bug's guts are exploding from eating these GMO foods, and a lot of you have enteritis, colitis, Crohn's, irritable bowel syndrome, leaky gut syndrome, that's the result of genetically engineering your digestive system to break down. You need to quit eating the grains. Absolutely, there's no question about it. Even if they say they're organic, they've been adulterated. You cannot have organic and non-organic coexist. This is what Whole Foods wants you to think. We are going to coexist. Impossible. Mexican scientists are telling you that they can plant it in a constrained area and the thing is 1,000 miles away with the same genetic code. You cannot contain this. This has got to be eliminated, or else all of us are going to be afflicted in some form or another, and this is part of the culling of the herd, if you will. So, this is one way of doing this. Now, when you get done with your bath and you've patted yourself down, reapply this again. When you go outside, apply this on your external features that are going to be exposed to the weather. This will form a protective barrier. Here, I'll show you. There it is, it's wet. Okay, rub it on. It will hydrate the cells because of the penetrating effect of the aloe vera and the citric acid in it. It goes on quick, it's there. When it dries, it'll leave a sheen. It acts as a protective barrier to minimize any further exposure to the atmosphere. Okay? So that when the stuff is coming down, if it's on your face or on your neck, you'll be walking down the street and you'll be walking into a webbing. You think it's a spider's web. It's not. That webbing is the result of the chemtrails, and those chemicals then will start penetrating the skin and you'll start having outbreaks. That's how lethal this stuff is. So if you're finding yourself touching a web, it's not necessarily a spider's web. And if you see any loose webbing floating around, do not touch it with your hands. Use gloves or use some sort of insulating material to gather the stuff, because once you touch it, it'll go inside. It'll pass right through. Okay. The last research I got was on chaff. And apparently chaff, when wet, with snow or rain, will penetrate the epidermis, will penetrate the skin. So again, they're dumping this stuff. They're dumping it, and you'll notice that in different sections, in different regions of the countries, whether you're in Europe, United States, Russia, or wherever you are, you'll find that the trees, different trees will be afflicted. Here in Ontario, where I'm at, the maple trees, the chestnut trees, the oak trees, and the fruit-bearing trees like apples and peaches all have these black residual spots. Out west, it's been the pine trees that have gotten the bulk of it. Okay, different set of trees. So, and even in the southwest and even in the northwest. So there is an indication there, a strong indication that there are different chemicals in the chemtrails. There's a foundation that's the same, but they have different alterations because they're killing off the crop and the trees. Monsanto wants to have aluminum-resistant plants so that they can sell them to the farmers. What the hell is that? Why would I want to eat something that can absorb more aluminum to give me more brain damage? Excuse me? It's not somebody else who's getting this idea. We need to stop GMOs. We need to stop the chemtrails. Okay. So again, this will help you. The bath will help you. Okay. The bath is crucial to reducing the load. Using things internally like pectin. Okay. I'm a bigger believer of pectin than I am of the clays and the other things. Pectin works with the body, breaks down, It has quercetin in it, or it has, components in to pull metals out of the body, even radioactive metals, radioactive materials. You are dealing with radiation. Iodine is in here. Why is iodine in here? It acts as a protective barrier against radiation. It also breaks down metal. So once the biofilm has been broken down, okay, and you're using phosphorus internally, phosphorus stops the assembling of the polymers. Stops it. Okay, I've been again discussing this with a fellow out west named Brian. He's done the research on the military end of this stuff. He's got volumes of stuff on this stuff. I did it on the biofilm end. Okay, and so I deal with it from that end. The biofilm and the polymers are one and the same. If you were to look at, say this was a polymer, and you have a bacteria, fungal, microbial, viral. Viruses and bacteria in nature do not coexist. They are antagonistic to each other. But now I put them in a medium. So this tiny particle now has penetrated the skin and starts to do its thing. And so it starts to proliferate. So again, the viruses and bacteria now are growing inside you. Now one way to stop it is put a barrier around you. And a barrier would be a simple thing as a copper aluminum barrier, a barrier that blocks the harping, which can trigger the signals. But that's another story for another day. But anyway, this is something you can use. You can use it daily. You can put it all over your body. I wouldn't put it on the genitals because it will sting, but you can put it on the bigger parts of the body. Wherever you've got an infection, put it on. You will find it will heal it very quickly. You will start seeing things come up. As you can see, I put it on my face. It's already dry. I put it on my arm. It's already, and I've got a barrier. Okay, you can't even tell it's on there. Okay. Again, you can use lemongrass if you want. Let's say you're going into a hospital and you're worried about MRSA. So make some of this stuff, add lemongrass to it, and rub it all over your body, especially under here so you're breathing it in constantly. Lemongrass stops MRSA. There's a lot of things that stop MRSA. This whole idea that MRSA is an incurable staph infection is all baloney. I've got documents showing how they're curing it down in the southern part of the United States with certain antibiotics, but they will not release those antibiotics because they're very expensive. So your alternatives are essential oils, iodine, silver, GSE, propolis, and a whole host of other things. All right, I think that's it. Now you've got a simple little remedy you can make at home. It's called the Morgellons stripper. All right, to the next segment, to your health, eh?